Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this series within a series looking at our trauma brains, how we can get stuck in the adaptations of childhood, which is part of my Wildly Loved series, looking at all the aspects that go into how trauma brain affects our life and relationships and selves. And then within this series, a little mini series called What is My Trauma Type?, where we are going through Pete Walker's book called Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving. And we're going to go through fight, flight, which I just did, the 2 videos, go check those out, freeze, fawn, collapse and submit, and attach, cry out for help, which are the last 2 that, maybe 2 trauma types you've not heard so much about. So we're going to talk about the freeze response today. And Pete Walker also calls it the camouflage response, because basically we're often stuck in a more hiding, isolating, kind of frozen, avoiding human contact dynamic. Before I get started though, really quickly, if you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. And please check out my resources down below, checklists, some journal stuff you can access, some free journal stuff, a free online course, and 2 courses I created with truly all of my heart last year, really grounded in helping us heal, especially if we were raised by parents who fell somewhere on the untreated, borderline, narcissistic, emotionally immature spectrum. And so I'll put the link for that down below. All right, so the freeze response is this. The bottom line is that people who have this as a primary go-to trauma type, and now also if you're not sure what I mean by trauma type, check out the first video I just posted a couple days ago here. The bottom line is that people with the freeze response believe that people equal danger. And they learn that in their childhood, right? Through those attachment experiences. And so what has happened is they've kind of given up on human connection. And remember that all of these trauma types have like a spectrum. And so I would say this response for me is definitely one of them. It's not my primary one, but when we're introverts, when we're deep thinkers and feelers, when we've had a lot of trust and betrayal in childhood, I can spend, a week alone. I mean, I've been raising 4 children, so with not much of a break for the last 23 years. So, that makes sense. But some people can't do that, right? They just can't be alone. And I have to be careful that I can be an auto-regulator and be alone. And so remember that. So you might be an extreme end of freeze or some variation of freeze. And the distortions with this one that Pete Walker talks about is that there is no way I will connect. Not going to connect. It's not safe. And to be safe, I have to hide from the world in some way. And so Pete Walker says that this dynamic, when this freeze type is your main go-to response, that this is often the scapegoat or most abandoned child, the lost child who is forced to freeze. And so they basically go into a more dissociative dynamic where they might, watch TV for hours on end, daydream through, wishful thinking and fantasizing, sleeping, online activities, gaming. All of that allows us to disconnect from the pain, the original pain of our abandonment wounds, and that it really protects us from any other sort of dangerous social interactions, which can really trigger our feeling re-traumatized. And it's true for all of the different trauma types that there is often an underlying fear of social interaction and social anxiety, and not necessarily in the full diagnostic criteria, but that people can be really stressful, right, and triggering. And so we're trying to minimize that and manage that. And that often even lines up with a more avoidant childhood where maybe you spent a lot more time alone regulating emotionally. And that's where you learn to deal with stuff. And so that is your first go-to. And so many of us who have this dynamic, when we are, struggling, our first instinct is to be alone. And so there are some detrimental characteristics associated with the freeze response. Clearly being more dissociative and kind of, literally in your body and otherwise, going other places, hiding, isolation. Pete calls it being a couch potato. That's an older term, right? For just like basically just sitting on your couch and watching Netflix for hours and hours, or being on your phone or whatever. Being a space case, that's kind of similar, or spacing out to dissociation, obviously. Being a hermit, being afraid of achievement, being achievement phobic. And then he talks about schizophrenia and ADD, and I'm not going to get into those in terms of how he sees them, but if you think about and read more about the way he's describing these responses, you can see why that might make sense. And so the bottom line is that we have learned that, it's just safer to do our own thing and be alone. And remember that these do correlate in many regards with our nervous system. And if you think about the freeze response in terms of the dorsal vagal on the polyvagal theory ladder, that is a collapse. That is a shutdown, an immobilization, right? Where we're just sort of down. And sometimes when we think about the animal world, where we can't fight and we can't flee and have flight, the next response available to us is often freeze. And even in the animal world, when that's not possible, you can see animals go into it's very actually interesting what happens chemically inside, and the way the body can protect from pain. But they almost appear to just be dying before they die. And it's a complete shutdown. In many cases, we can see the freeze response protects us from a situation that we just have to endure. Even if we're not going to not be here anymore, we just have to endure it. And we can't fight, we can't flee, and we just have to sort of go somewhere else and freeze. And that has that dissociative quality to it. And so it is a survival technique. But like all of these, we can become fixated upon them and stuck in them. And between our inner critic, who's trying to keep us safe from more trauma, and our fears of intimacy, you can see why a freeze response that kind of culminates in removing yourself from the world, that people are unsafe, would be a very likely and natural reaction to many different types of childhood events or adult events. And so what can you do? Certainly we want to work on increasing safety behaviors that relate to safety and connection. Oftentimes getting into relational dynamics. And for many people, though this type is disinclined to go to therapy, that can often be the first real safe relationship, assuming it's a good relationship, where they can be present with someone else who doesn't really want anything from them, but is just really there to help them heal, to be present, to be a witness, and to be supportive, and to really walk alongside them in their journey. And so Pete says that this style is similar to fight in that they are less motivated to understand their childhood trauma, and they are unaware of their inner critic, or that they are even in pain. And so they tend to project that perfectionistic demand of the critic onto others rather than themselves. And so they're really expecting so much from themselves, but really what they're doing is avoiding pain. And so this survival mechanism really helps them implement justifying why they need to be alone, right? They're like, in my childhood, isolation was smart, and that kept me safe. And so why would I not do that now? So they're so content at being alone, you have to work on pushing yourself to have relational connection and to tolerate the experience of other human beings. And that can happen in little doses and in little safe relationships where you kind of slowly build vulnerability. We're not going to see you jumping in here wildly, and if you do, it's not going to go well, probably. Now we can also see, of course, like all of these for different reasons, self-medicating behavior because of the isolationism and the loneliness. We have to kind of, quell that in some ways, and we don't want to feel what we have to feel. And so that can set us up for all kinds of addictive behaviors and substance use and abuse. And so we're really going to want to shrink the critic, right? Work on that inner voice and the inner and outer critic that is always judging yourself and everyone else. We want to work on like all of these, grieving the loss of childhood. We want to increase connection, like I said. And we want to understand that the impact of our auto-regulation and being alone really sabotages intimacy and kind of keeps us stuck in that trauma response. And Pete talks about using the access of anger to kind of, to dig into that energy. Because if you think about immobilization and collapse, like in polyvagal theory, it takes something to move up the ladder to that sympathetic response. And anger sometimes can be very mobilizing. Sometimes we need to access what we feel that way, that we're mad about something, to get us out of that collapse. And there are different and healthier ways to do that than hurting yourself in anger or someone else. But dealing with your anger as an energetic motivator, which needs to be dealt with, because chances are you really, repressed your anger and don't feel entitled to it. and that's coming out in that more depressive collapse response. But dealing with your anger is incredibly powerful and incredibly important for many, many people I work with. I often see them not knowing how to access anger, and or they raged in childhood at the parent, but there's been no real integration in dealing with their feelings, and that ends up, you know, translating into other feelings as well, not just anger. So that is the freeze response. We'll go in, like I said, next week to more hybrid combos of these different types. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you will know that, as I keep saying, you truly are worthy of wildly loving yourself and the world and others, but it is a tall order to just love yourself. You're not just going to wake up and do it. So much of this process, I believe, is about learning how to go back and heal our wounds, increase connections, find, you know, grace and compassion in ourselves, because we're often very harsh with ourselves, and that we really are worthy of it. And so I hope in some way that this video and this series is helping you do that. And I thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I will see you tomorrow, where we're going to talk about the FAWN response, which is a huge one, right? All of us people pleasers and caretakers and all of that, more anxious or disorganized attachment patterns, we definitely can see in the FAWN response. So, as I said, take good care, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.